Okay, good afternoon. So, again, going back a bit, we were looking at different types in terms of evidences with respect to the anatomy and morphology. And within that, we had looked at the homologous organs, analogous organs, adaptive divergence and adaptive convergence. We haven't looked at as such, but that is direct inclination of this topic is with respect to how an organism adapt to the situations, and then they go on becoming different species, or from different species how particular organism gains certain characteristics which at the end are similar. So that is something same to what we had looked at in terms of homologous and analogous organs. So either they are diverging, that means becoming a different characteristic. For example, that hand example we had seen, from hand in human to the wing in bat or a bird. So that is like having similar structures, but they are still at the end different structures. So that is like a divergence. And adaptive convergence is like through different time frames, they have becoming a similar structures. So that is like mainly in terms of plants that happens. That is a adaptive convergence. Vestigial organs also we had seen. Now the last topic that we are going to look at is the atavism. This is also called as reversion. So let me come to that slide. Yeah. Sorry. This atavism, it is the reappearance or functioning of the certain ancestral characters or organs or parts after several generations. Reappearance, that means they have been lost throughout the generation. Lost in the sense, lost in terms of phenotype or appearance. But they start appearing again. That is atavism, and which has either like earlier completely disappeared, or they have greatly reduced to like in terms of their appearance. And this can be like, for example, like presence of short tail in some human babies. I'm sure you must have heard some random news when the news channel they show something like this. So that is exactly an example of this, the atavism or reversion. So in this can be any certain characteristic like short tail, which we are the descendants of ape category, and those ape category they had a short or even long tail in the earlier cases, and that has been missing like at least in human generation. And if it reappears, so that is one example. Power of moving pinna in some person, some like adults or even some human characters or human beings, they are able to move their pinna, that is the ear part. Long and dense hair on the body. Now this has gone to a different extent. Most of the times, even the change of the skin, like to that extent. But long and dense hair, like usually some people have too many or too much of hair all over the body. So that is one another example. Appearance of large canines in rare cases. In some of the not babies but young adults, I would say, they have developed these canine structures very prominently. Sometimes they even have it additional. So that is one another example. Or the presence of two rows of mammary. Like in earlier case, like how most of the mammal, for example, cow has four mammary gland structures. So something like that. Even in case of human, having the two rows of mammary, so two on the top and two on the bottom. So that is something like an example of this atavism. Now, this whole of this concept was actually studied and described by this fellow called as Louis Dolo in 1893, and what is currently known as Dolo's law. Now, the reason why I have highlighted this statement in red is because it's given completely wrong in your textbook. So in textbook, it says that the living organism exhibit reappearance of ancestral characteristic. But Dollo's law is actually the evolution is not reversible. That means evolutionary characters, they are also not reversible. That is the Dollo's law. And atavism or reversion is actually an exception to that Dollo's law. And that's how this Dollo's law also became little famous. So please make correction in the statement in the textbook. It should ideally be living organism does not always exhibit the reappearance. So of the ancestral characteristics, or in short, it is the evolution is not reversible. It is irreversible process, and structures or functions which are discarded during the course of evolution. That means something which has been missing across the generation do not reappear in a given line of organism. It might happen somewhere randomly, but that is like totally different scenario. That's just a part of adaptation. But in the same organism or same descendants of those organisms, this evolutionary characteristic generally does not appear, and that's what was the Dollo's law. And then there were many exceptions which were found to this Dollo's law. So that is what is altruism or reversion. Now, the question that I had yesterday also, like why does it happen? Yes.
Like, after he studied this, Louis Dollo, he gave Dollo's law, right? But shouldn't he have done it before? Like, why would he give this law after finding the exception? Like, before finding the exception, he should have given this law, right?
He did not find exceptions. We are studying the exceptions.
No, but the concept of reversibility was advocated by L. Dollo, right?
Huh?
So he already knew this.
So that is what I am saying. Whatever is written in the textbook is little controversial.
No. I'm not talking about the red statement.
It's the same. Even the upper statement is the continuation of the textbook thing.
So he didn't know about atavism when he gave the statement.
I'm guessing so. He didn't give that term for sure, as far as I know.
So we are supposed to write the below statement, not the above statement.
Yeah. Okay. Because I looked at different resources and it always mentioned that evolution is not reversible. But like this statement, if you go, it states that living organisms exhibit reappearance of ancestral characteristics. I'm not, so one of the confusion I still have, and I'm still going to look at the original research article. Was it the Dollo statement which was evolution is not reversible or evolution is reversible? What is exact statement? Because both of these statements, they are coming in description. But which was the original statement? That I'm still I need to confirm. I found many resources which mentioned this, the second paragraph or the last point. But in textbook, this is given, and I had a doubt, so I googled it more, and I found only this statement. I did not find anything about this. Of course, this is there in terms of when they talk of this atavism or reversion, but in Dollo's law context, it was not there at all. So that is,
Yeah, I searched the internet, and actually what I found, it said that organisms will never become exactly identical to what they were before.
Correct.
So they might, some characteristics might reappear, like the tail or able to move the pinna, but not all of them. You won't be completely transformed.
No, that description is all right. But in terms of law statement, which is the law? Does it reappear? That is the law. Or evolution is not reversible? That is the law. That is.
No, it's that an organism will never completely return to its former state. So some changes might happen where it goes back, but not completely.
Yes, so I think neither of them is a law, right? Because both of them are exceptions to each other and both occur. So maybe what Akshay is saying is
No, that is perfectly fine. I agree with that point. But the only when we think in terms of what did Dolo exactly had said,
Yeah.
because
What I found is what I'm saying is what Dolo said.
no, but then why is this statement given like this in the textbook? Then it is still wrong.
Yeah, so
Yes.
there are multiple interpretations because he gave it in a slightly ambiguous way.
Yeah. But yeah, anyway, like we can search. I will again search, and you can also search a bit about it. But what I felt looking at most of the resources is the evolution is not reversible, which is equal. We know that, or the organism or the species which exists now, it cannot go back and become something which existed earlier. Some of the characteristics they might keep coming and going and so on, and that will be the universal thing. So that way, but then what did Dolo said, and what exactly is this connection with respect to the Atuism, that I'm still not clear. Okay, so I guess I leave this part here. Yeah, so I was talking about why does this happen. So again, this particular part is mostly like we know most of the genes, they are evolutionarily conserved, and some of the genes, they are permanently masked in the human species, though we have quite a lot number of genes, and depending on their what we call as promoter or suppressors or activators, they express in a particular manner and they exhibit a particular characteristic. Now, if that manner in which they express or exhibit a characteristic is changed, the expression pattern of that particular gene can go back to how it was earlier. For example, that like having lot of hair on the body, that's exactly how it happens. Certain cells, they might have this gene activated, and then all over the skin this hair's growth will start. So that's the simplest example. So it's all dependent on what we call as epigenetics of a particular gene, how it is involved in a particular suppression of that gene or activation of the gene or changing the expression pattern. It's all related to that genetics aspect of this, like what we say, Atuism. If at all the gene is not present at all, in those cases, those characteristics may not appear. Like obviously, whatever genetic makeup was present in the few millions years ago may not be the same now. But certain genes, they are still being present. And most of the other genes, they are not there, right? So those genes, they may not have any function even now. Whether they are suppressed, there will be no question of suppression, activation, or anything else. But those which are present and those genes which have been changed over the time, they might exhibit the characteristics like the ancestors. So that is what this Atuism, like that is the reason why this Atuism occurs.
So, is it like dominant and repressive genes?
Yes. So that it was also mentioned in one of the research article that I was reading at, that currently if a particular gene is dominant or rather particular phenotype is dominant, and because of certain epigenetic activity within the cells, and again during the developmental phases, if that dominant gene or allele is suppressed, then the earlier dominant characteristic means throughout the period of evolution, whatever dominant phenotype was exhibited, that might take over. And again, there are several possibilities with respect to the epigenetic, what we call reasons. So it is according to that rule.
So like, okay. So there are many copies of the genes, but like the ancestral ones are being suppressed by the dominant one. So because of some genetic problem, if the dominant one isn't able to express itself,
Yeah,
then the older ones will.
correct. But that is again one of the reasons that I know of, and I'm sure there will be many other reasons as well. Okay, so that is about this reversion and atavism. Now, so there was this very interesting evidence from the Darwin's tour when he was traveling to this Galapagos island. So this Galapagos island is very famous in terms of evolution or study of evolutionary history of different organisms, because it has a very wildlife very much reserved. It's next to Ecuador in southern hemisphere. I hope you know where Ecuador is. So next to that, there are these islands, and on that islands, when Darwin visited, he found 13 different species of the ground finches. These are like a type of birds which are relatively smaller in size and shape. And there are different types of finches, tree finches and so on. So this one is specifically of the ground finches. And these species, they differ from each other in the shape and size of their beaks and the type of food they eat. So if you look at this particular diagram, right, you would see all these beaks of these birds, they are different. Like they might look a little similar to us, but surely functionally and structurally they are much different. Like drastic difference you can see in these two. Right, this is more pointy and kind of stout. This is pointy yet a little bigger. This is pointy but small. Right, so that way this is more stout. This one is small and like stout. So that way there are like all these different characteristics. The purpose is just to show you the different kinds of beak that were observed by Darwin. So the different types of beaks and that too evolved from the stout conical beaks of the parental finches, because earlier known the evolutionarily known finches, they had stout and conical beaks. Stout and conical means a little shorter in length, and they were conical, and that they lived in the mainland of Africa, which used to feed crushing seeds. So if this was the ancestral characteristic, and then nowadays what we see is these 13 different species of ground finches, that means surely there is certain connection or certain adaptation that has happened over the time. So so in case of this, so there were these different types, and they were categorized into 5 main types: insectivorous warbler finches. So they had the slender warbler-like beak, and so on. So again, we need not go into these details, but yeah, just to let you know, there was insectivorous, like warbler-like or tree-like. And if you look at the different slender, short, and thick parrot-like beak, parrot-like, I hope you all know how does the parrot beak look like. It's like one is little extended and the other one is short, lower one. That one is like parrot, short and stout, and the long and D-curved beak, right? So, and depending on these shapes or the size of the beak, they feed on different food. Like short and thick beak, it feed on the beetles and insect. Parrot-like beak, it feeds on leaves, birds, and fruits, and so on. So that is what Darwin observed, and that also gave an evidence that there is a common ancestor to all these different types of finches, and they have evolved into these different shapes of their beak later on. And this whole of this thing is the picture is showing the same thing. So that is one of the evidence from the Darwin's finches. You can also Google, this is a specific type of ship, and that has certain characteristic, and Darwin was traveling with it. So that's why it is specifically named. So Darwin on his voyage to on the ship with this HMS Beagle. You can just Google it later. You would know what it is. Huh?
Darwin already knew that there was evolution, and he already knew the origins of all these finches.
No, he studied during this process. He did.
So, but how would he know that they all came from mainland Africa?
So these statements are given later. These are statements given by the book writer. These are not the statements by Darwin.
Okay, so okay, he went there. He found different types of finches.
Yeah.
And he gave a theory that all of them originated from one.
Yeah.
So before he didn't know that they had a common ancestor.
I'm not sure that he would know that fact, because to go to different lands and identify different samples, that itself must have been a very difficult task, plus in one lifetime. So I don't know, and plus earlier days.
Didn't he take into consideration that they could have been different to begin with if he didn't know anything about evolution?
Yeah.
So why isn't that a possibility? There are different types of finches. So how would that prove evolution if we know nothing about it?
No, but we know
already, if you already okay, we look at this information. If we already know that evolution is there and we know their ancestor in Africa, so we can say, yes, this is a type of evolution. So this is a case scenario. So this is an example. But if we didn't know anything about evolution and we didn't know that all of them originated from one, so we can just say that no, there were 10, 13 different varieties of finches to begin with.
Yeah.
And all of them are on this island. So it doesn't really prove evolution, right? So how did Darwin, use this as a evidence for evolution?
See, that is what the reason why of adding this particular point, that they lived on mainland of Africa, because earlier the continents, they were together, right? And then they separated. So some species of the finches, they had obviously looking, depending on the environmental situations, they would have adapted to those different situations. So that is why this connection, and that is why it says clearly that it is most likely the part of the evolution, that going from one place to the other, they have developed into so many different species. Otherwise,
Darwin said that, or are we saying that?
No, now we are saying it.
So Darwin didn't say that.
Darwin didn't say it.
So how did he in his time, how did he use this for evolution purposes? It was an example, but it could have worked either way.
No, see, what he knew was there are finches.
Yes.
Right? But then within finches, he found several other types. So the obvious connection that stays there is that a particular, all of these species, they have developed from a particular species of finch.
So, but we know that he might, he couldn't have assumed that.
Well, it is very clear, no, it's same organism. Why wouldn't you say that?
Right now for us, of course, it's common sense. But back then, if theory of evolution, it wasn't there, it wasn't proved.
But he was studying it, no? So he was knowing it already.
Yes, sir. But it wasn't proved, right? So he didn't know if it was true or not. So he was studying it. He was experimenting, and it could have been that all of them were different from the in the first place. It could have been that they didn't originate from one. At that time when he didn't know. Now to we know.
Yeah, correct.
They probably had a few common characteristics.
Yeah, they had quite a lot of common characteristics.
Yeah, and based on that, assume that they got them from the same place, which is the common ancestor.
Yeah. So the typical, that's when these characteristic of finches, they are all same except certain, of course, some of them they evolved into different shapes as well, and even the sizes, their sizes were drastically different if we look the smallest to the largest one. But the main pattern was with respect to the beak that he wanted to observe, and again the kind of food that they eat. So this was the part of the adaptation, and ultimately adaptation is part of evolution.
So he just had an insight.
Insight, it's very well there. I don't know why you are calling it an insight. It's right in front of us. Even if you have something like this data, you would try to connect the dots.
Well, yeah.
So that's what he did probably.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, this could have been one of the major things, like one of the major reasons.
Yeah. So and also, like, it's like you see four-legged animal like cat. Now, if I put cat, leopard, and dog, something like this together, you would see that they would have certain, even if you don't know it's cat, dog, and leopard, you will see they have certain similarity, and then you will trace back their origin to some extent. Right? It's something like that. There is something
what I meant is that, well, okay, you look at it and you can say it a bit, but you can't really prove it. Like dinosaurs. If Darwin saw dinosaurs, then he couldn't have proved it, because those flying dinosaurs. So
Correct.
like the flying dinosaurs and the earth dinosaurs, like they looked similar. Just one had wings and one didn't. But the flying guys were dinosaurs at all. They weren't, right? And like today's modern birds are closer to dinosaurs than the flying guys were. But when he looked at them, he would have obviously thought that those two are closer. Like maybe they had a common ancestor, and today's birds are completely different. Because look, if you look at the characteristics, it's very close between the flying guys and dinosaurs, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, you can't really prove it. It doesn't have to stand always.
Yeah, but then again, that is the thing why we don't call these completely experiments. We call them as theories, because what Darwin gave us was a theory of evolution, what we call as Darwinism. It was not, he just put certain observations together, and then he postulated few things that this is how it would be. And then over the time, now we have proven quite many facts. And that's when we add information to what Darwin said. So that's how this example is fitting in there. Okay, so that is the evidence from this Darwin's finches. Actually, this Origin of Species, this book, if you haven't read, I mean, I haven't read completely, but I would still recommend. I have read some part of it. It's a very interesting book. You will like it if you are liking this whole part of evolution. No, you will really like that book. And just go through it. You will find even soft copy online very easily. Okay, so the next part is the evidence from the embryology. Now, again, there were several points with respect to similarity and like having a common ancestor starting from the embryo stage. So, if you look at this particular picture here, you can clearly see the first developmental stage, not first as such, but the first row here in the developmental stage that is being shown for different species, starting from the fish to salamander, tortoise, chick, up to human, which is a drastic difference in terms of physical characteristics when the complete organism is developed. But if we look at the structure of this first row, they look very, very similar, right? Even if we look at these later organisms, they look very similar, right? And that is one of the another evidence of the having common ancestor, because it's very rare chance that the development of an organism will happen in exactly similar manner if they were evolved from two different types of species, right? If only and only if they had a common ancestor, this is how we would see as a developmental pattern in different organisms. So in case of these earlier developmental stages, most or rather all of these multicellular organisms, they were similar in terms of starting their life from the fertilizing. That is the first point. All of these structures which are developed, they develop from the fertilizing, what we call a zygote, and then undergoing that zygote, undergoing mitotic division, then morula and blastula and gastrula, and then formation of these three germ layers: ectoderm, endoderm, mesoderm. So that is a common process for most of these organisms, right? And that is how there is one more evidence in terms of embryology that all of these organisms, they have developed from a common ancestor. They have developed at different time points and in different manners, but they still have a common ancestor, and which is very, very apparent from this picture. Then there are, in terms of resemblance among the invertebrate larvae. So these were the examples of vertebrate species. So in terms of invertebrate larvae, so there is something called as strokophore larva, which is a small translucent free swimming larva with a characteristic of marine annelids. Annelids, these are the organisms which have like roundworm, but segmented roundworm, segmented, or they have rings on their body, like earthworm. That is a type of this annelid. But this particular species, trochophore, it had this, the presence of trochophore larvae in mollusk and annelids indicate the origin from the common ancestor. So mollusk as well as this annelid species, they contain this their embryo or their what we call as just newborn. This looks like a small translucent free swimming larva. Like you might have seen sometimes when you have a pond or something, there are like very tiny creatures which are just crawling inside the water body. So something like that. That is what will look like trochophore larva. In both the cases, mollusk, which is like a snail-like organism, as well as this round worm or round and ringed worm, annelid type of organism, for both, which are drastically different in terms of their characteristics, but both of them, they showed a common presence of this trochophore larva. So even in case of invertebrate, there seems to have a common ancestor. Also resemblance among the vertebrate embryo. Now, if you take only specific vertebrate embryo like rabbit or human and other species, you will find again something similar observation, like what we have seen in this diagram, same observation. So this is like an overall structure, but if you look at the eye development, or if you look at the particular limb development, in case of vertebrate, that is more similar. So that is one more evidence. Temporary embryonic structures. Now this is another interesting fact. So the visceral clefts, or what is also called as gill clefts, in all the land vertebrates. Now this gill structure is required for the aquatic organism, but same structure during the embryonic stage is present in the embryonic stages of the land vertebrates also, which is not required, right? For land or terrestrial organisms, this gill structure is not required. So why it has to be present at all in the embryonic stage? The only answer that remains is because the aquatic vertebrates as well as the land vertebrates, they will have a common ancestor. So that is one evidence. Notochord being replaced. Yeah.
Is it there in humans also?
Humans, I'm not sure, but I guess yes.
So, is it possible that because of atavism, is it possible that a human is born with gills?
I doubt that. Visceral clefts. No, the song will come in human. Let me see. Why does this happen every now and then now?
So it's a new feature. It happens to me also.
ये हर बार करना पड़ेगा तो it's difficult. What is this nonsense? Sorry. Huh. Yeah, images. So it looks like it is present. Does it show? First left. Yeah. It's there. is this structure? Human embryology. Yeah, Pratham, it's there. You can see this.
Where it's pretty large.
It's not really large, I would say. This whole structure is still like what we can say, it's maybe 3 month old, not 3 month, maybe.
No, but sir, if you look at the ratios,
Yes.
then it actually is quite large.
But then, all of these things will develop into different cellular masses, no? Upon differentiation.
This seems to imply that if you see the ratio, like Akshay said, this seems to imply that this is a very important organ of the body.
Yeah. No, but I'm still like not sure of that fact. Because if we look at this particular part where they are showing second, third, and different cleft structure they are showing here, that will ultimately become the parts of your lungs, right? Because that's how it looks like. And what was?
So it looks like that it's connected to the lung. So there's a pharynx there on top.
Gill clefts. Let me type. Yeah, here there is chicken embryo and human embryo. Slits homologous to fish gill slits. Yes, they are there, very much there. In human also it's there. And I guess I remember, like, if we look at that embryonic developmental stages, these gill slits are the one which will make those different folds of the pleura, that is the layer outside the lungs and so on. So must be something related structure, but again, I'm not too sure of it. But yes,
so if you don't let, like, some of the modern genes suppress the older genes, this can actually develop, and that human might be able to breathe underwater.
Yeah, maybe. But then still the gills may or may not be completely developed, because it needs space, it needs that typical environment of and also that what we call as dissolved oxygen, taking that oxygen, dissolved one, into the body. Gills will do, but then what happens after that? Like lungs, we have mechanism of mixing the blood with the lungs. Sorry, mixing the oxygen with the blood.
So even frogs can do that.
But then in human, that whole mechanism has to be developed again to have that ability to what we say, breathe in water.
So maybe you can get the slits and all that, but you won't be able to survive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
blood will just come out and you'll die.
Yeah, I mean, you might have a structure, but the functionality may or may not be there. Okay, so that is this visceral clefts or gill clefts, which is one of the embryonic structures still present in most of the land vertebrate. Then notochord, which is replaced by the vertebral column. So notochord is the earlier structure in terms of that when the neural plate formation happen after the blastula, that 3 germ layers, they arrange themselves into a specific manner. Notochord formation. Where is it? Yeah, something like this, but this is not a better diagram. I guess, let me just give me a minute, because that will be important to show. Yeah, this one can do. So usually there are these 3 germ layers, right? And like if you make them flat, they form a notch like this structure, and then they make a tubular structure, right, at the center. So this is something like a notochord, and that will develop into the what we call as the vertebral column in most of the vertebrates. And this again structure is very common in all of these vertebrate organisms, especially at the embryonic stages. And then of course whatever happens to it, like for example, in some of the cases it might extend into a tail-like structure, or in a fish-like structure it might extend into the fins. So the like later happenings of what it becomes is different in different organism, but in earlier embryonic situations, most of these species, they have this notochord which is replaced by the vertebral column. Also, tooth birds which are present in the embryos of the toothless whales as well as the birds. So in the birds as well as in these toothless whales, which is one of the specific category, they also have these tooth birds. Again, at the embryonic stages, when these organisms, they are not supposed to have tooth structures. Still, they having a tooth structure, which is again an example of they have a common ancestor which had tooth-like structure, which has disappeared in this particular species. So that is like another evidence from the embryology point of view. Also, the development of the vertebrate organs. Most of the organisms, again, they have these kidneys, gonads, hearts, brain, and ear development also happens in a similar manner. So that way, it is another evidence that if it is happening in all these species in a similar way, if not same, that means they tend to have a common ancestral species.
Sir,
yeah,
I had a question with relation to the chromosomes, the number of chromosomes. So if you're splitting into two different species with two different number of chromosomes, how can you just lose one entire set of chromosomes, like from a cat and a human?
Usually it's not merging of the chromosome or it's losing of the chromosome. It can be also merging of the chromosome, or it can be splitting of the chromosome into two. So that's how the numbers, they are different in different species. I'm sure earlier species, they would have had a very simpler.
No, but sir, suppose it happens in one organism, it won't be able to reproduce with any other organism of that species because those will still be different.
See, it is not with respect to reproducing with the other similar species. It is these changes, they happen in the same organism, and when they go for the next generation, that is where these changes are happening. So like what we know of one fact is genes leading to the external, like genotype leading to the phenotypic changes. But during this course of evolution, one of the other important aspect is also the environmental factors which leads to changes in the phenotype, and these phenotypic changes, they further go back and changes the genotype of particular organism, and that process is again a very long process in terms of years, right? It is not within one organism it will like flip and change. It's like over the time these species, they keep on developing, and that's how these changes keep on happening even in terms of chromosomes.
So, like it has to be a mutation, right? You can only change
one mechanism, but deliberate change within a particular genotype, that can also happen.
Yeah,
Sir,
category only.
So suppose like a species, it produces like 10 offspring per generation, every next generation, and one of them has a mutation and something changes, like the number of chromosomes, or it loses a tail or something like that. So especially if it's something in the genetics, suppose it loses a chromosome, they won't be able to reproduce, right? Or even if they do, the next generation will be severely defected.
So it depends on what are the conditions there, actually. Because see, if the number of chromosome is different, then the fusion may or may not happen of the gametes, right? If at all it happens, the next question is whether that organism will survive. If it survives, whether that organism will be what we say, having the ability to reproduce. So all of these factors, like they will be there.
So, like, how do so many different individuals of a species, like, why would they have the same mutation?
No, they will not have same mutation. But that is when, like, let's say, you and you go and start staying in this Galapagos Island, and I stay here,
Yes,
right,
sir.
with our partners, and
So there are 10 of us and 10 of you.
huh,
And okay, like we split. So there's a geographical splitting. Yes.
and then you start developing as per your own habitat wherever you
So
are.
that's what, right? So you won't develop according to, like, sir, in the end, it all depends on the gene, right?
No, that is what I'm trying to say. It's not
I
just,
mean,
it's
you
the
might
environment
you
and
might
type as well.
like you might physically lose an arm, but if you have a child, the arm will still be there, right?
Yeah, correct.
So like the environment may change you, but it doesn't change the species.
No, it does change the species. No, that's what we are saying.
So only through mutation, right? So the gene itself has to change for an organism to pass on the change to the next generation. If the gene doesn't change, the organism will not be able to pass any change, right? Then the next organism will be like identical to this organism.
So that is what I'm trying to say. It's not just gene to phenotype. It's also sometimes phenotype to genes. That change does occur. And then that's what gets created into new species.
So, but like, how can you do phenotype to gene? Let's say,
That's the
let's say you.
adaptation, no?
Yes, sir.
That's the part of adaptation.
Yes, sir. But adaptation happens solely through genetic mutation, right?
No.
So, like, okay, if you're there, if you stay in the sun and you get a tan, but let's just say it's a bird that gets a tan and it becomes maybe black or brown, but genetically wise, it's blue.
Correct.
So okay, the genetic, so the environmental factors, it has affected your phenotype, and now you got a tan. So now you become darker, but like the offspring won't get a tan, right?
That's right. But then what we are not speaking of these kind of phenotype. What we are speaking of is over the time when you start staying in, like let's say one generation stayed in the sun that got tanned, next generation
I
also.
guess the doubt is in the mechanism of the change. So we understand that there is a change, but we don't understand how. Is that known or it's still not discovered?
It is known to some extent because it's the same mechanism like what we call as physiological or molecular basis of certain genetic changes. Like,
So, but we can't label that bird a black bird, right? Then, because the new offspring that will be born, it'll be blue at the start. Then after some time, it'll get a tan. And like, if the genetics doesn't change, like, why would the genetics change just because the surface the surface got tanned? It has to be a mutation somehow, right?
it's not always the change, genetics change or mutation does not always mean that there will be some change. Like we just spoke of that example of where certain genes are masked, right? Or certain genes are overexpressed or the expression pattern changes.
So
So if
that itself is controlled by genes, right? So one like gene.
But not always by genes. That's when I'm saying epigenetics is not always by genes. It's the effect on the genes.
So
Not
by what? Like something has to change the genes, right? Like
so
like
in
yeah.
case of adaptations, like let's say for example, particular situation in the stomach, like let's say it keeps on secreting acid every now and then. So my
Yes.
stomach cells, now obviously stomach is not going to reproduce, but as an example still. So let's say stomach cells, they get so used to it, now they start secreting more acid, which leads to the chemical changes like what we call as molecular.
Yes, like, but all that will happen because of a mutation of the genetic cells of the stomach, right?
That is not happening because of the mutation. It is happening because of the physical environment. It's not of the mutation.
So, but
sir,
something has to. Okay, yeah.
it's
Go
like
ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, it's like overuse of a particular organ will cause that organ to grow more. So, like the giraffe's neck, that was mentioned before in the evolution chapter only. Overuse of that, trying to reach the higher branches, caused the neck to grow a little longer.
Correct.
Yeah, and so sometimes it can be the switch between the dominant and the recessive also.
So, but the theory of use and disuse is not accepted, right? I mean, it works in some places, but it doesn't work in most places.
Correct. That is true. That is
So,
true.
like in the end, it all depends on the genes, right?
No, Pratham. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not, that is when I'm saying, like, had it been only genetics, then you would not have so many different species. It's also the physical fact, the environmental factors are adding, like the same example of the giraffe which Akshay mentioned. That is a perfect example of something that I'm talking about. It did not, I mean, of course, it had changes in the genetics later, but then the striking factor or the driving factor for that change was the grassland. The animals which were living on the grassland, the grass was not growing for some reason. I don't know. That is.
No, but like I said, the theory of use and disuse, it has some prime examples like the giraffe, but it doesn't work for most cases, right?
Yes,
That's why it's not accepted.
that's
So,
how
like,
different species are created, no?
yes, sir.
That's how different species are created. One species will develop from something like the example of giraffe, or other species will develop through genetic mutations. So there are like different such situations.
No. What I'm saying is that the giraffe thing, so I don't believe that it's only because the giraffe tried stretching its neck that, the next generations, the neck grew taller. It has to be something in the genes, right? Maybe some factor caused the gene to make it so that the bone is longer or something.
No, you can say that genetic changes happened, but not necessarily they started with it. Genetic changes would have happened, but that happens sometimes at the start, sometimes at the end.
So the genetic changes were caused due to the physical environment. But
come again?
The genetic changes are caused due to the physical environment in that case.
Yes.
So, but genetic changes ultimately happened, but it didn't start with the mutation.
Right. So again, like just another hypothetical example I can give you is like, let's say a particular gene is required and that is getting expressed, but the environment changes. So that particular function is not required, right? So obviously over the time when that disuse is happening, right, that particular function is or structure is not getting used, that gene has no function. So the cell will develop a mechanism to suppress that particular gene, and that becomes a genetic change because it's getting masked every now and then in every other generation.
So like the giraffe example, let's just say that the giraffe stretched its neck and it grew 2 centimeters by the end of its life. So like it's impossible that the sun would have a 2 centimeter long neck.
No, but
would have the same length neck, right?
You are assuming
you're assuming that the genes didn't change. No, let 20, 30, let 100 generations pass, and the genes didn't change. So in the embryo, when it's developing, the gene will still say that you have to have a 1 centimeter neck. It won't suddenly become 2 or 3, right?
See,
if the genes don't change, you won't have a longer neck, but because of the first generation stretching its neck and it growing by 2 centimeters, it caused a genetic change that made the neck grow longer. Ultimately,
like if you stretch, you can like physically cause your bones to grow longer, right? It doesn't have to change your genes.
Yeah, but that's what it did change your genes somehow.
Yes, sir.
Which is what the question.
That's what I want to ask. Yes.
So the expression pattern of the cells, what we call as proliferation and differentiation of the cells, they have drastic effect on the genetic expression as well. So like simplest example I can give is, like, let's say a particular protein goes and binds to the cell receptor on the cell membrane surface. That can have effect inside the cell on the genetic expression. It can either allow certain genes to express, or it can suppress the expression of certain genes. So that does happen. And
all these are proteins, right?
These are proteins.
And proteins are made by genes.
Proteins are made by genes, correct?
Yes, sir. So like to make such proteins that are receptors or anything else that inhibit or do something else to a gene, the gene has to have a change before that. It's like who came first, egg or chicken, right?
Correct. But then if you go at even higher level of mechanism, what we are talking of cellular mechanism, if we go at molecular level of mechanism, it's not even a protein then which makes these changes. It's simple molecules like your cyclic AMP or calcium ion or sodium ion and potassium ion, because these are the ones which generate that change in the electric potential and so on, and that leads to certain changes within the whole structure. So that is the overall idea. So ultimately, like what I was saying, in the sense that a physical environment can also lead to the genetic expression change, and it can also lead to the genetic changes, which we call as mutations otherwise.
Okay, so like if you're in an environment which has more cyclic AMP, so you'll eat more cyclic AMP and there'll be more cyclic AMP in your cells.
And hypothetically, yes.
And because of that, that cyclic AMP will do something to your gene and you'll grow more accustomed to cyclic AMP.
Yeah, it's something like that. It's simple thing, no? Like we know that fact that we have developed from animals who used to eat grass, right? Now those animals, they had the cellulase which used to digest the cellulose, but we can't digest it. That's like suppression of particular gene. And it's not that we don't eat grass, we eat lot of vegetable which is equivalent to grass, I would say.
So in the end, it depends on the raw material that's there in the cell.
It depends on the environment and what changes does it lead to.
So the environment provides the raw material. So
environment, not necessarily, it can be built depending on certain situation. The metabolism also changes, right? So that metabolic activities can lead to different types of metabolites that can have.
So if you use a lot of one muscle, then it starts building up some chemical in that, and that concentration will increase in all the cells, and that will cause gene change.
Yeah. Okay, let's stop here. It's already 2:35. We can continue in the tomorrow's class on the same. We haven't finished that embryology part. Okay. Thank you. Bye bye. Others, you stay. I'll speak to you. Bye, people.
Thank you, sir.